Sister picks grandpa over dad to walk her down the aisle after years of neglect from both parents. I'm 35 with two younger siblings, my sister is 29, and brother is 23. Our parents are extremely religious and conservative. Growing up, our parents cared very much about their image in society. They always wanted a son and were extremely disappointed when me and my sister were born. Being their first child, when they found out that I was a girl before I was born, they contemplated not having me, but because they are religious, they decided to go through with the pregnancy. My grandmother has told me that when I was just 2 years old, my mother sent me away to stay with her as she was depressed having me around. Growing up with my grandparents was amazing. My grandpa patiently taught me how to ride a bike. I still remember the thrill of pedaling on my own for the first time. Those bike riding days created a strong bond between us that lasted a long time. My grandma taught me all about gardening. I learned how to take care of plants, see flowers bloom, and enjoy having a little piece of nature. The skills she shared during those gardening days still help me today. Throughout all this, my parents never once came to visit me until I turned 7 years old and people started questioning them about why I wasn't staying with them. They dragged me back from my grandparents to stay with them despite my protests. I would have loved to continue to stay with my grandparents as they brought stability and warmth into my life. After 3 years, my parents were over the moon to learn they were expecting another child. However, when they found out it was going to be another girl, they were disappointed again. Surprisingly, though, they were a bit more relaxed about it compared to when I was on the way. Thankfully, my sister didn't have to go through what I did, and she stayed with our parents. Growing up, the differences in the way my parents treated me and my sister were quite noticeable. For instance, I was expected to help my mother out with a lot of household chores and responsibilities. It felt like a never-ending list of tasks that I had to complete to meet their expectations. However, when it came to my sister, the rules seemed to be a bit more relaxed. She didn't have the same level of pressure, and my parents were more lenient with her chores. It was like they had learned from their earlier parenting experiences and decided to take a different approach with her. Another example was the way they handled our education. When I was in school, there was immense pressure on me to excel in every subject. My parents had high expectations, and any deviation from top grades was met with disappointment. They enrolled me in various extracurricular activities, pushing me to be the best in everything. On the contrary, when my sister started school, the atmosphere was significantly more relaxed. While they still cared about her education, the level of intensity was not the same. They allowed her to explore her interests at her own pace and didn't enforce the same strict rules that I had experienced. The most striking difference, however, was in the way they celebrated achievements. When I achieved something notable, it was often met with a nod of approval or a brief acknowledgement. In contrast, when my sister accomplished something, the whole family celebrated as if it were a major milestone. These differences created a sense of confusion within me. I couldn't comprehend why the same parents could have such contrasting approaches to raising their children. It wasn't easy growing up in an environment where I felt constantly scrutinized while witnessing my sister enjoying a more carefree upbringing. However, I made a conscious effort not to harbor any resentment towards her as I recognized that my sister wasn't responsible for the parenting decisions made by our parents. Despite these challenges, I remained committed to supporting my sister and being a positive influence in her life. In fact, we managed to maintain a good relationship and have always remained close. 6 years later, everything changed when my brother was born. My parents had a massive feast to celebrate the fact that they finally had a son. Since the day he was born, it was clear that he got special treatment. He had fancy clothes, expensive toys, and a super cool room that was way fancier than what my sister and I had. Our parents really went all out for him, buying the best baby gear like top-notch strollers and an expensive crib. It wasn't just about stuff, our little brother got way more attention too. Our parents took tons of pictures and videos of him hitting all his baby milestones, but when it came to me and my sister, there was never this much fuss. Even in everyday things, our parents were more involved with him. They never missed a doctor's appointment or a play date, always there for him. For me and my sister, our grandparents played a bigger role in our lives after my brother was born. This unequal treatment didn't just stop with babyhood. It continued as my brother grew up, shaping the way our family worked and causing some challenges along the way. My brother was exempt from many household chores that my sister and I were expected to handle. Our parents often made allowances for him, excusing him from responsibilities that were an integral part of our daily routine. Birthdays and special occasions became grand celebrations for him, complete with elaborate parties and expensive presents. As you can imagine, this made me and my sister feel left out all the time. To be fair, I had gotten used to their treatment pretty much by this time, but this was the first time that my sister was experiencing what I had been through as a child. We started to spend a lot of our time and vacations at our grandparents' place. As we spent countless afternoons playing in their backyard or sitting by the fireplace listening to their stories, our grandparents became our confidants. We shared all our fears, dreams, and the challenges we faced at home. My grandmother would always assure us that we were not alone. When I was a teenager, I was labeled as a rebel child by my parents because I openly had different political beliefs from my family. When I tried to explain my points of view, my mom would usually cry and tell me that I was stressing her out. If I ever expressed sadness or anger in front of her, my mom would get angry and tell me that she can't stand to be around me when I am like that. and would then ignore me for the next few hours. As my sister got older, she began to become more of an individual and also developed some mental health issues. For years, my mom refused to get her treatment because, according to my mom, she didn't really need it yet when my sister had panic attacks or anxiety. My mother would tell my sister that she was burdening her. There was this one night when things got really bad at home. My parents were going on and on about how my sister and I were such a disappointment and that we should have never been born. It felt like we were drowning in their harsh words, and we couldn't take it anymore. Feeling lost and hurt, my sister and I decided to leave home. We packed our bags and headed straight to our grandparents' house. Our parents found out we were at our grandparents' and showed up, demanding us to come back home. My grandmother scolded them for treating us this way, and my dad replied that he provided us with food and a roof to live in, so what more could we want from him? Hearing this, our grandpa, who is usually very calm and composed, got really angry and raised his voice for the first time. He yelled at my father that he should be ashamed for treating his own children this way, and threatened him that if he ever did anything to hurt us, he would call CPS on them. This really scared my parents, as my brother was still young and they were scared to lose custody of him too. Grandpa continued to defend us by insisting that we deserved better parents than them. I clearly remember him telling my mother that she was his daughter, yet he had never treated her this way, so how could she ever be cruel to me and my sister? My mother's face went red in embarrassment. That fight at our grandparents' place became a turning point, as this was the first time someone stood up for us, and it made all the difference. After that night at our grandparents' place, things kind of changed at home. Our parents, especially Dad, got a bit scared after what Grandpa had threatened him with, so they toned it down a bit. Our brother continued to get extra love, but the constant yelling and punishment for us got a bit less. When I turned 18, I really wanted to go to college, but my parents were super against it, so we had this massive fight. My mom went on about how, as a girl, I should just focus on getting married and having kids. She said guys wouldn't be into a woman with too much education. My dad joined in, making fun of what I would even do with more education. It was a real mess to hear my own parents discourage me from being independent based on my gender. Despite their protests, I went to a 4-year university right away. I had a scholarship due to getting selected for their program. This meant that my parents didn't have to pay anything for me. My parents got really angry at me for defying them, but I didn't care. I started to work part-time during college and save money during this time. Living alone in college was a game changer, teaching me the ropes of adulting and giving me a taste of the real world. Balancing books, a part-time job, and my personal life wasn't always a walk in the park, but it sure made me stronger and more self-reliant. Throughout all this, my parents rarely called to check up on me. Eventually, I graduated and got myself a full-time job. I had saved up enough money for my part-time job so I could move into a flat with roommates. My conversations with my parents became less and less, almost to the point of non-existent. It wasn't just me pulling away, they seemed content with the distance too. The occasional birthdays and holidays went by without much more than a generic greeting. There were times when life hit me hard, job struggles, relationship woes, and my instinct was to reach out to family. But each time, I hesitated because I knew they would not care. The idea of going back to that emotional roller coaster with my parents was daunting. Soon it became a conscious choice not to involve them in my life whatsoever. The only person in my family I remained in constant contact with was my sister.